The unspoken code of silence between NBA superstars and the officials has finally snapped. LeBron James isn't just frustrated, he is done biting his tongue, and he is coming for Scott Foster with everything he has got. But the king isn't standing alone in this war. The Brotherhood is breaking ranks, exposing the man in stripes. Listen to James Harden, a guy who usually plays it cool, telling the world that Foster shouldn't even be allowed in the building anymore. Then you have Chris Paul, and with him, the blood is bad, real bad. He made it crystal clear that this isn't just basketball. It is personal. A grudge held for years that cuts way deeper than the game itself. Even the suits in the broadcast booth can't ignore the smoke. They are saying it out loud. Scott Foster has crossed a line, and something has to give. But the rabbit hole goes deeper, much deeper. Foster's name is tied to the darkest era in league history, tangled up with guys who went to prison for fixing games. Let me put you on game. This was the collision heard around the world. In every sport, there is that one split second, a single crystallizing moment where parallel universes, the players and the refs, crash into each other with violent force. That crash happened on the night of May 20th, 2023, Western Conference Finals. Game 3, Lakers versus Nuggets. And this wasn't some poetic metaphor. It was physical, flesh on flesh, bone on bone, leaving the most hated official in NBA history with a bloody lip and a one-liner that might have been a confession. Second quarter. A minute on the clock. LeBron is doing what he has done for 2 decades, running the floor like a freight train, reading the defense, plotting the kill. He turns his head for a split second to snag a pass from D'Angelo Russell. And in that blink of an eye, boom, his shoulder plows directly into the face of crew chief Scott Foster. The whistle in Foster's mouth becomes a weapon, jamming into his lip on impact. LeBron immediately pleads his innocence, claiming he never saw the stripes. On the sidelines, Austin Reeves cracks a joke about a technical foul, but the laughter is nervous. Everyone in that arena, from the nosebleeds to the bench, felt the weight of that impact. The face of the league had just drawn blood from the league's most controversial enforcer. And Foster's reaction? That is where this turns into a psychological thriller. He claims he was just trying to clear the lane. LeBron apologizes, says he was locked in sprint mode. Foster brushes it off, but then he drops the line that froze the internet. You've been wanting to do that for 25 years. On the surface, it sounds like veteran banter. Just 2 old heads who have shared the hardwood since the class of 2003. But when those words spilled out of Foster's bloody mouth, they didn't just fade away. They lit a fuse across the entire basketball world that is still burning. Because that joke, it wasn't really a joke. It was an acknowledgement of the ghost that has haunted Scott Foster's career for decades. The open secret that the players, the guys who actually put butts in seats, want him gone. The roots of this beef go way deeper than a stray shoulder. Sure, the hit was an accident. No foul called. Handshakes all around. But the clip went nuclear, racking up millions of views, and the internet went to work. They started connecting the dots. The memes were ruthless. The conspiracy theories exploded overnight. And the real question wasn't if LeBron did it on purpose. It was why the hell were so many fans cheering for the referee to get hurt? To understand that kind of animosity, you have to understand the man. Who is Scott Foster? What does he stand for? And why is number 48 viewed as the single biggest threat to the integrity of the game? The man has been blowing the whistle since the 94-95 season. His resume is a fortress. On paper, he is untouchable. By the 2024 season, he had called over 1,600 regular season games, 263 playoff battles, and 26 finals games. He is the Iron Man of officiating, holding the active record for playoff appearances and working 16 straight NBA finals. To the league office, Scott Foster is the closer, the guy you send in when the lights are brightest. But talk to the players, the men whose sweat and legacy build the billions, and the script flips completely. In anonymous polls from the LA Times and The Athletic, Foster wasn't just disliked, he was voted the undisputed worst referee in the game. Not a runner-up, the worst. In 2023, a quarter of the league named him personally. And when you peel back the layers, that collision with LeBron starts to look less like an accident and more like a pressure valve finally blowing. James Harden, one of the greatest scorers to ever lace them up, didn't mince words after a brutal loss in 2019. He called Foster out by name, called him rude, called him arrogant, said he is a guy you just can't deal with. And Harden didn't stop there. He painted a picture of a tyrant who kills the flow, a ref who refuses to have that crucial back-and-forth dialogue that keeps the game from boiling over. If you can't talk to the official, the game breaks down. The trust evaporates. It destroys the relationship essential to the sport, and then Harden went for the jugular. He did something you almost never see in pro sports. He publicly demanded that a specific referee be banned from working his team's games. He looked right into the camera and said it, I don't think he should be able to officiate our games anymore, honestly. Look at the lineup. It isn't just James Harden, Chris Paul, Paul Pierce, Kyle Lowry, Damian Lillard, or Rudy Gobert. The roster of superstars and future Hall of Famers who have openly declared war on Scott Foster reads like a legendary who's who of basketball royalty. Gobert got slapped with a $100,000 fine in 2024 for flashing the money sign at Foster, a gesture that screamed the refs were answering to Vegas, not the rulebook. Kelly Oubre Jr. didn't even try to hide it, getting right in Foster's face to scream, "You're a horrible ref," back in 2025, happily paying the fine just to speak his truth. Then you have the king, LeBron James, a man who has spent 2 decades battling the stripes, not just targeting Foster, but fighting the corrupted system. Foster has become the face of. Flashback to that gut-wrenching loss to the Celtics in January 2023. LeBron goes to the rack, gets hacked by Jason Tatum on a play that should have ended the game, and the whistle stays silent. James didn't just complain, he collapsed in agony. He was slamming the hardwood, telling the world later that the officials look him dead in the eye and say, I didn't see it or it wasn't a foul. It's not making sense to me. He was serious. It was frustrating as hell. Man, it was breaking him. The NBA's own last 2-minute report admitted they blew the call. Sure, the crew chief was Eric Lewis that night, not Foster. But that anger is systemic, and Scott Foster is the man sitting on the throne at the center of that hated system. So when LeBron's shoulder smashed into Foster's face that night in May 2023, and Foster joked that Bron had been waiting 25 years to do that, nobody focused on the hit. The real question, the one that keeps fans up at night, is what exactly has Scott Foster been doing for the last 30 years to make everyone from the greatest scorer in history to the guy on the bar stool believe the game is fundamentally rigged? To find that answer, you have to dig into a log of 134 phone calls, the shadow of a convicted felon named Tim Donaghy, and a nightmare scandal the NBA prays you never remember. 134 calls and the ghost of Tim Donaghy. Back in 2007, the association faced an extinction-level event, the biggest officiating scandal in the history of American pro sports. Tim Donaghy, a 13-year vet in stripes, pled guilty to federal conspiracy charges for wire fraud and leaking gambling info. He wasn't just guessing, he admitted to betting on his own games and feeding inside info to the wise guys, including heavy hitters linked to the Gambino crime family. He did 15 months in the feds and got a lifetime ban from the league. But here is the smoking gun the league desperately tried to bury in the desert. During the exact timeline of Donaghy's criminal run from October 2006 to April 2007, phone records prove Donaghy made 134 calls to one specific guy, Scott Foster. Let that sink in. He called Foster more times than he called his own bookie, which was only 126 times. No other ref got more than 13 calls from Donaghy in that span. And the timing? It was sketchy as hell. Most were short bursts, under 2 minutes, clustered right before or right after Donaghy got off the line with high-stakes gamblers like James Batista. Now, Foster went through the grinder. He talked to the FBI. He cooperated with the NBA's independent investigator Lawrence Pedowitz. And the official verdict was that these were just personal calls, just two buddies shooting the breeze, talking schedules and flights, standard locker room chatter between colleagues who had been grinding together since the summer leagues back in the early 90s. Foster brushed it off years later, claiming, that's just how we communicated in 2007 before texting took over the world. No handcuffs, no charges. Scott Foster walked away clean, but the silence didn't stop the noise because Tim Donaghy refused to go quietly into the night. In his 2009 tell-all, personal foul, Donaghy claimed the rot in the officiating room went all the way to the bone. He alleged referees were soldiers, manipulating games on league orders to protect superstars, stretch playoff series for ad revenue, and prop up big markets. And in interview after interview, podcast after podcast, Donaghy keeps pointing the finger. He broke it down in cold detail, explaining exactly how the machinery of the fix works. "I knew what the league wanted called that night," he said. "I knew how to put a team or a player at an advantage or disadvantage. That admission is the kill shot. It exposes what the NBA never wants to admit. Officiating directives from the corporate office can tilt the floor." Donaghy took that inside baseball and weaponized it to line his pockets. But his bigger point was that the tools for manipulation were already built into the system. "I was always making correct calls," he claimed. "But I knew which times correct calls to make that would put a team in a hole they couldn't climb out of." And when he was pressed on exactly which referees the NBA trusts to handle these special assignments, when it comes to the clutch, those high-wire moments where legacies are forged, Tim Donaghy didn't just drop hints about the so-called Game 6 and Game 7 specialists. He named names. Look, it is brutal. I honestly do not know if you will ever see anyone else go out there and pull the trigger quite like Bavetta did. But then the conversation shifted to the man standing dead center in this storm. It feels like Foster and Mark Davis are getting tapped for a lot of these games. You know, the heavy hitters, looks like Davis is the go-to guy for Game 6s, I think. But Foster seems to own Game 7. Foster on a Game 7. The kill floor. The absolute highest stakes, do or die, maximum revenue showdowns on the entire NBA schedule. And listen, this isn't just Donaghy running his mouth. The cold, hard numbers back him up. Since 2008, teams down 3-1 or 3-2 in a playoff series have won roughly 70% of the games Foster called. Compare that to the league average of 35 to 40%. That statistical impossibility is the bedrock of Foster's most notorious handle, the extender. The cleaner the league sends in when they need one more game, one more gate check, one more night of primetime ratings. Now, to keep it honest, some analysts have tried to pump the brakes on this narrative. A Reddit deep dive from 2025 looked at Foster's track record as the extender since 2021 and found it had regressed to 50%, right back to the statistical baseline. And another study by Owen Phillips found that while Foster blows the whistle more than any other ref 2-point, 3-1 more fouls per 100 possessions than the average, the way he hands out those fouls isn't drastically one-sided. But here is the thing, those spreadsheets cannot calculate psychology. And in this league, perception is reality. Because when you have Rasheed Wallace, a 4-time All-Star and a champion, sitting on a mic and flat out calling Scott Foster a cheater, that is not a data point. That is battle scars. Sheed went on the Underdog NBA podcast and broke it down, detailing how refs conspired to hit specific guys, labeling Foster a company man, a tool the league uses to manufacture the ending they want. And then you have the blood feud that defines Foster's career more than any box score ever could. His absolute war with Chris Paul. Paul's squads are 3-17 in playoff games with Foster on the floor, including a skid of 13 straight losses. Without Foster, Paul's playoff win percentage is a respectable 564. With him, it craters to 105. And CP3 hasn't exactly kept his mouth shut about it. Yeah, it is. It is personal. We had a situation a few years back, and yeah, it is personal. You feel me? The situation Paul is hinting at, it involves his own blood. According to Gilbert Arenas, who broke this all down on his show, the root of this Paul Foster beef goes back to a parking lot after the final buzzer. So, the deal with his son, I believe it was post-game. Lil Chris is just playing around in the tunnel area. Scott Foster rolls up in a car with another official, leans on the horn, and screams at the kid, "Get the hell out of the way!" You have a grown man, an NBA referee, allegedly screaming profanities at a child, Chris Paul's child, from the safety of his vehicle. And from that, second on the bridge between Paul and Foster was burned to the ground. CP3 finds out, and naturally, like any father would, he is furious. But Arenas also shined a light on some of the chats they have had over the years, with Scott Foster basically dropping little comments before tip-off. Arenas revealed that before massive playoff games, Foster would reportedly taunt Paul about his losing record in games that Foster was officiating. Yeah, that playoff game, I think it was against the Spurs, he walks up to him and says, "Hey, you haven't won a closeout game with me yet." A referee taunting a superstar about his inability to win when that specific referee is holding the whistle. Let that marinate for a second. Because what Arenas describes next shows why this isn't just a beef, it is an existential crisis for the integrity of the sport. You look at me, and mentally, you cannot beat me. That implies, and that is why I said it was bad for the league, because emotionally, you just told the Phoenix Suns you can't win. Because by the time the 2021 NBA Finals rolled around, with Paul's Suns up 2-0 on the Bucks, the league made a call that defied logic unless the logic was exactly what the conspiracy theorists have been screaming about. They are playing the Bucks, and finally, they are up 2-0, and for Game 3, they bring down Scott. Bring on the Kraken. Aha. Wow. Lost by 20. The Suns got smoked in Game 3 by 20 points the second. Foster walked into the series, and he came back for Game 6, too. According to Arenas, the reaction in the betting markets was instant and violent. Damn near all of America switched their tickets. Went straight with the Bucks. Yeah, they took the Bucks, minus 40. When the simple announcement of a referee assignment moves the Vegas lines, when a change.org petition demands a ref's firing with thousands of signatures, when an NBA champion admits to changing his own bet just because he saw Foster's name on the sheet, the question isn't whether the game is rigged. The question is, who is pulling the strings? And that dark alley leads us straight to Boston, the Celtics connection, and a system designed to protect its own. If Scott Foster is the face of the extender, there is another name that has quietly become the face of something arguably much worse. One team keeps coming up in the whispers over and over again. The Boston Celtics. But the man wearing the stripes at the center of this storm, it's not just Scott Foster. It's his partner in crime, Eric Lewis, and when you pull that thread, the whole sweater unravels. 19 seasons, 1,061 regular season wars, 91 playoff clashes, 6 finals. Lewis wasn't just an official, he was a fixture. Until May 2023. That's when the internet detectives cracked the case wide open. Lewis was living a double life, running a shadow Twitter account under the alias Blair Cutlift. 0 followers, 0 clout, just a ghost account used to fight in the mud with fans, especially Lakers fans who dared to say he was in the tank for Boston. And this is where the plot tightens. Flashback to January 28th, 2023, LeBron drives, Tatum hacks him across the arm, the whistle, silent. The crew chief staring right at that play was Eric Lewis. The league's last 2-minute report admitted the screw-up. It was a foul, plain and simple, but the Celtics walked away with the overtime win. Meanwhile, Lewis's burner account is online, mocking the outrage with tweets like, "Lakers still blaming the refs, huh? Y'all played the number 1 team and they don't get any credit." Then boom, August 30th, 2023, Lewis retires. Investigation closed, but you can't unring that bell. The fans had already connected the dots, and the picture was ugly. Since 2020, when Lewis was on the whistle, Boston went 36-2. That's not a record, that's a guarantee. Stack that against Foster's history, where the Celtics are winning at an impossible clip, including a perfect 6-0 run in the 2023-24 season, and coincidence stops being a valid excuse. Tim Donaghy? Yeah, the rogue ref himself called this shot way before the burner account blew up. On a podcast, he stripped the varnish off the game, explaining exactly how allegiances bleed into the final score. I know Eric Lewis. His crew missed a pivotal call against LeBron just last week. He didn't mince words. Donaghy drew a straight line between the officiating and Boston's suspiciously good fortune. They said he's something like 20-2 when he refs Celtic games. The numbers don't lie. He broke down the mechanics. It ain't about a bag of cash in a dark alley. It's about human nature and the system. It's a situation where, there's favorites. Maybe he knows someone off the floor on that team and suddenly they get the benefit of the doubt. That right there, that is the anatomy of a fix. Forget the brown envelopes. The NBA's assignment system creates a greenhouse where bias, conscious or not, grows like a weed. Think about it. A referee who extends a series creates drama, generates revenue, and gets rewarded with the primetime slots. A ref with a buddy in the front office can shade a game, twist the momentum without ever making a single call that looks wrong on replay. It's subtle, it's deniable, and it changes everything. And the league's response to this radioactive fallout? December 2025. The NBA quietly opens the door and lets Eric Lewis back in as a G League official. Byron Spruill, the league president, called it a progressive path, not a punishment, a path back. The guy with the burner account, the guy behind the LeBron no call, was being welcomed home. Meanwhile, Scott Foster is still out there running the show in the biggest moments. 2025. Thunder versus Pacers, Game 4 of the finals, 53 fouls. A whistle fest that had the whole world screaming. Rick Carlisle, a man who's seen it all, looked like he was about to snap, but the fans were past anger. We're in the danger zone now, resignation. The feeling that the fix is in, that the shield is there to protect the logo, not the integrity of the sport. Kendrick Perkins, a champ who's been in the trenches, summed it up perfectly after Foster tossed Chris Paul back in 23. You could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Yeah, because Scott Foster has to stop, right? Perkins knows. We all know. It's not about one bad night. It's about a pattern that's been rotting the floorboards for years. Right there, that was zero tolerance. At some point, you got to look in the mirror and ask, when is Scott Foster going to face the music? And that question has been hanging in the air for 2 decades, met with total silence. 134 phone calls to a convicted match fixer. And still, the whistle blows. The guys grinding in the paint voted him the absolute worst in the business, the villain in stripes who acts untouchable. We are talking about a statistical anomaly so glaring it shifts Vegas betting lines just by him walking into the arena. A man locked in a decade-long grudge match with the point god himself. He survived the radioactive fallout of the burner account scandal, shrugged off petitions demanding his badge, and outlasted the viral storms. Fans actually prayed the suspension hoaxes were real, desperate for a clean slate. But when the smoke clears, Scott Foster is still standing center court. And that survival, that immovable, Teflon-coated permanence, is the smoking gun. It does not just scream corruption, it signals something the league office is terrified to admit. At this point, it does not matter if Foster is dirty or just defiant. What matters is the machinery behind him. The suits who grade him and protect him have completely lost the locker room, the fans, and yes, even the king himself. Think back to that warm May night in Los Angeles, when LeBron James, a freight train in sneakers, slammed full speed into the face of that system and finally drew blood. Gilbert Arenas broke it down perfectly, exposing the impossible corner the NBA has painted itself into. They want to keep the blinders on, pretending the house is not on fire, but here is the nightmare scenario. If you bench Foster now, you are practically handing Chris Paul the win and admitting the game was rigged from the jump. Exactly. That is the trap. The league is in a chokehold of its own making. Kick Foster out and you validate every conspiracy theory on the internet. Keep him, and the whispers turn into a roar. And standing in the eye of this hurricane is LeBron. He has never explicitly called Foster a fixer on the mic, but his legacy has been shadowed, shaped, and haunted by the very controversies this ref embodies. But when he crashed into Foster that night, he did something 1,000 fines and press releases never could. He forced the entire world to stop watching the ball and start watching the whistle. Now the lights are on, and the question is not if Scott Foster will pay the price. It is whether the NBA has the guts to referee itself. Because until they clean house, every phantom foul, every technical, and every playoff series is going to carry a massive asterisk. And that mark, it is not washing off. If you felt the heat on this one, smash those boxes on your screen to dive deeper into the game's biggest controversies.